there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I DNF'd in 2020. Believe it or not, I only had 6 DNFs in 2020, which is amazing because that means that most of the books that I read, I enjoyed. But before we go ahead and get on into the DNFs, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new content. I post new videos every Sunday and every Wednesday and sometimes on Friday. Don't forget to check down in the description box for links to all of my social media, including my Buddy Read Discord and my Patreon. Really, these books are in no particular order, and most of them I did own at one time and I've already unhauled them. The first book I'm going to be talking about is Ink and Bone by Rachel Caine. This is book 1 in her Great Library series, and I found this at a used bookstore one day, and I mean, great libraries, magical libraries, it sounded like something that I would really enjoy. In this world, there are these massive libraries that are in every single city, and they govern the flow of information to the people, and it's actually illegal for people to own their own books. And we follow a character named Jess, and his family runs this kind of black market book trade, and his family ends up deciding to send him into the library service to spy for them. So the premise sounds like something I would love. It sounds so cool, but I just could not get into this story. I DNF'd at about 50%. It was written, I think, in 2012, and so I felt like the story and especially the characters were just very YA for about 10 years ago. The characters to me personally just had no depth. They were very stereotypical, like you would have like your mean girl and then you'd have your, I don't know, your jock, like that sounds like high school, but they were just very stereotypical, and I just felt like the characters just didn't have anything to them, and I felt like the plot just moved way too fast, so fast that we ended up in the middle of the book where there's this war going on, and I'm like, wait a minute, we were just back at the library doing classes and now we're in a war. Like, I just felt like the progression of events was very confusing, so I ended up DNFing it and letting it go. The next book I DNF'd was Harry's Trees, and I can't remember the author's name at this point, but this is a just regular literary fiction book, which take it with a grain of salt because that's not a genre that I gravitate towards. But I picked this book up from my library, and it is about a man who has just lost his wife, and he ends up kind of going into this depression and forsaking everything and moving into the woods, and he ends up coming across this girl who is dealing with her own grief. She recently lost her father, and they kind of team up to build this tree house. And I think it's supposed to be, you know, just a charming story about a guy learning to dealing with grief and a little girl dealing with grief and how they kind of help each other. And I think I read a good maybe 30% of this book, and really there was nothing wrong with it. It's not a genre that I gravitate towards. So I don't want to dissuade you from reading a book that deals heavily with grief. It just didn't speak to me at that time. And the main reason that I DNF'd it is because I felt like the author was constantly going into the background stories of side characters. Like, I don't care about side characters. I just want to know about our main 3 characters and their story. But when he started going into this whole pages and pages of backstory about this guy in a bar, I was like, okay, I think I need to stop reading this book. So once again, it could be me because I don't read a lot of just regular fiction, but I just wasn't at all interested in this book. The next book I DNF'd was Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. This is a young adult romance, but I think it's supposed to be for like older young adults because both of these characters are in college. But we follow a girl named Penny who is about to go off to college and a boy named Sam, and they kind of cross paths and becoming each other's emergency contact, and a romance ensues between them. And honestly, I could not stand Penny. I found her obnoxious. Like, I found that she just did not talk like a 19-year-old, 18, 19-year-old. She didn't act like an 18 or 19-year-old. Not only that, but the voice, like the author's voice, came across just incredibly immature. And it was really like not a type of tone in a book that I personally wanted to read. So I really didn't get that far into this book before I was like, I don't enjoy this tone, I don't enjoy this character, I'm just going to choose to DNF. And also, romance isn't a genre that I normally pick up, so once again, take it with a grain of salt. It could have just been the plot. The next book I DNF'd was a classic, which I don't DNF classics very often, and that is Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., which is also surprising because this book is super short, but I just did not like it. And it follows a guy named Billy Pilgrim, and Billy was a prisoner of war during World War II, I believe, and he is constantly reliving memories of his time as a POW. So there are flashbacks between his time in the war to present day, and even to like scenes where he is lifted up by aliens. I really did not like the constant back and forth between these timelines. And the one thing I do appreciate about the book is that the anti-war themes and the questioning of why we go to war, you know, just killing our fellow brothers and sisters, was very evident in the book, so I really appreciated that. And I know that Kurt Vonnegut was a prisoner of war, and a lot of these parts of the book he did take from real life experiences, so I can completely appreciate that. I just did not like his writing style. I did not like the way that the book was put together, and I just felt like it wasn't cohesive and that there really was no plot. So I DNF'd this, even though the book is super short, at about 50%. The next book I DNF'd is The Guanaveer Deception by Kiersten White. This is a young adult fantasy. In this book, we're following Guinevere because she was sent by Merlin to Camelot to protect King Arthur, and Guinevere is a witch. She's not the real Guinevere. I like certain parts about this book. I like the setting. I like the fact that I was back at Camelot and we got all of our characters. But the thing that I didn't like about it, number one, was that I felt like the characters really had no depth to them. And I really didn't like the way that Kiersten White's writing style portrayed certain characters. It's just the way that she writes. And there was also a gender bent part to this story that I was kind of like, meh. You know, I kind of wish that she would have just left the original part of the story the way it was supposed to be instead of changing it. And then we had Mordred. Mordred was my least favorite character, and even though Guinevere was sent to Camelot to marry King Arthur to protect him, you know, they say it's a pretend marriage, even though it was done in front of a priest. I'm like, you guys, that's pretty much a real marriage. But Mordred kept hitting on her. Like, he's, you know, Arthur's wife, and you're hitting on her. Please stop. So it just bugged the heck out of me. I found him to be one of the most obnoxious characters that I've ever read, and I got about 85% of the way through this book before I was like, I'm just not enjoying it anymore, and I decided to put it down. And Kiersten White, I've decided, is also an author that is just not for me. And lastly, we have Esther, A Royal Beauty by Angela Hunt. This is a book that takes the historical story of Queen Esther and fictionalizes it. So I'm not really sure what that's called. It's not historical fiction. I guess it is historical fiction, but it's based off of a real person from history. But if you're not familiar with who Esther is, Esther was a young Jewish girl who, during the time of King Xerxes I, was taken captive because Xerxes was searching for a new wife. He was married, and his queen dishonored him, so he demoted her to basically a concubine, even though she was still the mother of his children, and started looking for a new queen. And, you know, during this time, you know, kings had thousands and thousands of women that they kept in their harem, but she was taken captive and brought to King Xerxes' palace, and eventually he chose her to be his new queen. And there was a conspiracy between Hamam, one of Xerxes' military leaders, to kill all of the Jews in this kingdom, and Esther had to go to Xerxes and ask for help. But going to Xerxes for help is just not something that you did. It's not like nowadays where you just, you know, if you're married, you just, hey honey, like, it doesn't work like that. Xerxes was almost considered a god, a deity, and if you summoned him without his permission, he would kill you. And the only way that you knew you were allowed to talk to him is that he had this scepter, and he would present this scepter to say it was okay to come to him. So Esther ended up going to him anyway and telling him about the plan to kill all of the Jews. And it was just, it's a very powerful story because she was basically putting her life on the line for her people. But this is a fictionalized book of this story, and I did not like it. And I've read nonfiction accounts about Queen Esther and her life, as well as the Book of Esther in the Old Testament, and I just did not like the way that this fictionalized version portrayed Esther, portrayed the relationship between her and Xerxes. You know, she was basically raped as a teenager, and the author portrayed it as, oh, like a loving relationship. I'm pretty sure Esther didn't have a choice in the matter. And I just did not like the fact that Esther was a woman that had a lot of faith, and that just wasn't portrayed at all in the book. And that makes me really sad, because Angela Hunt has a ton of books about historical women that I wanted to read, and I just have no interest in it now. So I've already unhauled this book, unfortunately. Okay, you guys, so that is it for my 2020 DNFs. I feel like 6 is a really good number, especially because a lot of those were genres that are normally out of my comfort zone. Let me know in the comments what books you have DNF'd, or if you have read any of these and what you thought about them, and I will see you guys soon in another video. Goodbye.